I am so excited to be here to share with all of you the Cole and Johnson brothers. So the story really begins with two brothers from Florida who, at the start of their professional lives, were working together. One was a school principal, one was and a math teacher, I believe at the time, and the other was just home from his music studies in Boston. The elder brother, James, younger brother, Rosamond. And they wrote together this song for a school assembly that would become known as today, the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. James wrote the poem and Rosamond wrote the music, and together they really that was the beginning of their relationship as a songwriting team. Shortly after that, Rosamond, who was kind of bitten by the performing bug, wanted to write a show, an operetta. And he convinced his elder brother to write the text with him. And they put this show together. It was called Tolosa. And they took it to New York City to try to make a name for themselves and try to sell the show. It was a big hit down in Florida. It was a success. They made enough money on the previews of the show to take it to New York and try to pave their way on the Great White Way. The show actually was not a success. It was not purchased by anyone or produced by anyone. But in that time that they went up to New York, they made a lot of really important connections with some of the key players in the scene in New York City at the time. Among them, Williamson Walker and Ernest Hogan, who were the stars of the minstrel stage at the time, which was really the only avenue for Black performers then. And Bob Cole, who was who wrote shows. He was a stage manager for the Black Patti Troubadours, which was one of the biggest touring companies for Black performing artists on the vaudeville circuit. And Oscar Hammerstein, who we all know that name now, but he was a big producer then, and he loved the work that these two had put together, even if he didn't see where it might fit on the stage just then. So with all of these connections that they made that summer, the most important was probably the one that, was undoubtedly the one that they made with Bob Cole, who was a showman and a writer. He, as I said, he had been touring with the Black Patti Troubadours, but he was really looking to change the way Black artists and performers were portrayed on stage at that time. And he had written a show with another Johnson, Billy Johnson, and it was successful. It was an all-Black cast. It premiered in 1898. It was called A Trip to Coontown, and it kind of reversed the minstrel stereotypes. It starred Bob Cole, and he, instead of being in blackface, which was standard practice for Black and white performers in this genre, he was in whiteface. And it actually worked. People didn't want it to work. The producers didn't want it to work, but it turned out to be a successful show, and it ran for 3 seasons in New York City. But at the end of this time, Bob Cole was looking for new writing partners, and he meets James and Rosamond, these two very green kids from Florida who just had a dream about writing a show. And together, they realize that they might have something here. So they sit down, they write a couple of songs, and right away they sort of start singing them for people who are the leading performers of the day, either on Broadway or the early vaudeville stars. The names are not as familiar now, but May Irwin, Anna Held, who was the wife of Florence Ziegfeld, Marie Cahill. These were all of the big stars at the time. And the first one to really latch onto their work was May Irwin, who loved this first song that they wrote called Louisiana Louisiana Lies, which is important for the rhyme scheme. So they write this song for her. She loves it. She agrees to sing it. And this song then leads to them earning what would become a really important and groundbreaking contract with some of the big, with one of the big publishing firms of the day. So the years that they're writing, circling right around 1900, this is now the summer of 1900. The standard of the day was Tin Pan Alley was the big music producer, which is not one entity, but many entities of publishing houses. And the sort of machine known as Tin Pan Alley involved not only sheet music publishers, but instrument makers of pianos and home instruments, and also the performers and the songwriters themselves. So all of these things were really important. They all worked together to sell sheet music. There was no recording industry at this time. Recording technology was very brand new. It was being used. There are recordings that I have not been able to put my hands on, but they do exist, of some of these early songs. But the way to sell music was to sell the sheets. So the shows would go out with all of these songs in them. People would hear them in regional areas of the country. Then they might get their Ladies' Home Journal in the mail, and there would be other songs printed in there. So then they would order more sheet music. So all of this worked together. These systems worked together to sell sheet music to the public. And this is right at the time that the Cole and Johnson brothers find themselves. So they were right away, that with the success of their first song, Louisiana Lies, sung by May Irwin, they were able to secure a contract with the Joseph Stern Company. And not only did they receive a stipend for a yearly salary, but they also managed to negotiate royalties on each of the songs that they wrote, which turned out to be very, very smart business practice for them, and really paid for later projects that we'll talk about in just a little bit. So before I go on, I do want, it's hard, I feel like you can't talk about songs without hearing the songs. So I want you to hear a little bit of Louisiana Lies. Due to the nature of the times that we are in, the state regulations don't allow for singers to perform indoors. So all singers all across the country are having to be really creative with how to do performances right now. And so I recorded Louisiana Lies with my pianist, Jill Brunel, outside in my front yard yesterday. So I will play that for you now. This is the very first song that was a big hit for the Cole and Johnson brothers.
All the time I'm working, I'm a-thinking about my darling down the river, across the way. Thinking about my sugar plum and wondering if she loves me all the night time, all the day. Sometime my heart gets in a flurry, sometime my head begins to worry, thinking about my Louisiana lies. That girl with the pretty shiny eyes, my lies, them eyes, they cause my blood to rise. I wonder if she really loves me, I'd like to know. I wonder if she really knows that I love She's just as sweet as lasses candy. She's just my size. I ponder all the time about my lovely lies. My lies, they're mine, my Louisiana lies.
So we have a little bird that was very active behind us, but that is Louisiana Lies. It was their first big song. Yes, bird applause. So one of the important things to know about them is that they all set out to write songs and create music and opportunities for Black performers that were not in the genre of minstrelsy. As I mentioned, that was really the only way for Black performers to find themselves on stage in that time. But they wanted to change that, and they did that really consciously. So that particular song is written in dialect, has dialect in the text, which is a way that they were able to appeal to May Irwin, who was a singer who was very much known for singing songs in that style. She was a white performer, but she sang, she didn't sing, I don't believe she sang in blackface, but she did perform songs in that style. But there's nothing that references anything racial in there. So that in itself was kind of a change from what had previously been done. They were, as I had mentioned, this important aspect of the selling the sheet music. So they really consciously put thought into how to sell the most music. And one of their next songs was The Maiden with the Dreamy Eyes. And the lyrics of that one go, there are eyes of blue, there are brown eyes too. There are eyes of every shape and size, there are eyes of every hue. So their first line, there are eyes of blue. They didn't want to leave it at that because that would only sell to half the population who had blue eyes. So they made sure to put in the next line, there are brown eyes too. So that way they covered all their bases and made sure that they could really sell all of those pieces of sheet music. So that's kind of where they're getting started. This all happened in the first summer. They had written like 15 hit songs that were starting to be purchased by these Broadway shows and these singers who at the time, book shows were not really popular. Book shows are where you have an entire show written with the story sort of intact and the songs are part of that story. At this time, there were more review type shows that would have different songs inserted in them. And so they had sold a number of these songs to shows that were about to open on Broadway in the upcoming season. So with this contract in hand and the royalties almost on their way in, they're all set for the upcoming season. James has to go back to Florida. They don't have enough money to just sort of wait it out. So he goes back to Florida, back to his teaching job, and Rosamond decides to stay in New York City with Bob Cole. In order to pay the bills, they put together a duo act with Rosamond playing the piano and Bob Cole singing and performing. And it becomes a way for them to perform their original songs in a vaudeville type setting so that people can hear them and then, of course, sell more music and become more famous with each of these, with more awareness of their songs. But there's a particularly wonderful passage in James's biography along this way where he talks about coming back from Florida to New York City and seeing what Rosamond and Bob have put together in their vaudeville act. And I'm just going to read a couple of little excerpts from this here. So James says, when I reached New York, I met several surprises. I was, first of all, surprised at the opulence of Bob and Rosamond, at their clothes, modest in pattern and design, but nevertheless expensive, at their dozen pairs of shoes each, at the abundance of their shirts and ties and socks. I felt like a country cousin. So he talks about them then going on to their performance that night, and he has to go see them. So he follows along, and he says the act was unlike anything ever done by Negro performers. It was quiet, finished, and artistic to the minutest detail. The two entered dressed in evening clothes. They did make a handsome appearance. And talking casually about the program they had best give in entertaining a party to which they were on their way. Rosamond, seating himself at the piano, begins to play a Paderewski minuet, which went over well. Rosamond then suggests further that they ought to follow with a little classic song. Bob demurred slightly, but Rosamond went ahead and sang Still wie die Nacht in German. The audience is now basically in the palm of their hand, but then they go on to sing their own original songs. And James goes on to say that this was the framework of an act that these two men played for 7 or 8 years with the success, with tremendous success in the United States and Europe. And they did, in fact, between shows and between songwriting stints, the two would travel together pretty much until Bob's death in 1911. James also says that this is the act that started a vogue of acts consisting of two men in dress suits and a piano. And I have found some pictures of the two of them together, and they really, they just look amazing. They're so beautifully dressed and so well presented. And I think that that was a big part of what made them successful, not only in their efforts, but successful in their goal of really providing a vehicle to uplift the impression, or to change the impression, I should say, of how Blacks could be perceived on stage. They didn't cut any corners. They always looked impeccable. And, you know, it wasn't enough to just say, we've got these great songs, but they really looked the part too. And that made them incredibly successful in this venture. So with these songs that they had written and all of the sheet music that was selling, they clearly are doing well financially now, and they can focus on what they really wanted to do, which was to write shows. And so in 1906 and 1908, they are able to produce 2 shows for Broadway that star all Black casts, that are truly groundbreaking in that they feature no blackface at all, and go even a step further to portray Black people as educated, as scholarly, and most importantly, in love. They put love scenes between Black people on the stage. This had not ever been done before. And these shows were really successful for not only for their time, but for the fact that they were not part of the conventional tradition. So the first show was Shoefly Regiment. This also was this also showed Black men as being patriotic soldiers, patriotic Americans, which was really important then. This was in 1906, and it was set at an institution that sort of resembled the Tuskegee Institute. And then their second show, 1908, was called The Red Moon, which was set in a sort of fictional parallel to the Hampton Institute, both of these schools being historically Black colleges. And The Red Moon goes even further to include a love triangle between a Black man, a mixed race Native American and Black woman, and a Native Indigenous man. And sort of And that one even goes a step further to not simply be a musical comedy, but to have some real serious moments, some real love songs in it, and it actually served to uplift both imagery of Blacks and of Indigenous people in one show. And they received a lot of praise for that, for taking the opportunity to not only write a great musical, but to use it as a vehicle for changing perceptions about Indigenous people and Black people, African Americans. Um, as much as I'm talking about how great they were at changing these stereotypes, they were not. They These shows still contain stereotypes, which is what makes them a little bit challenging to discuss or even revive today. I don't even know if it would be possible, because it's just it was such a different world, and what was acceptable then was completely different than what we are used to now. And they were not infallible in that way. They still included some things that portrayals of characters and naming of characters that are not things that we would want to sort of revive today. But I think what is important is that it served as a stepping stone to allow for further progression of this medium. And it wasn't until after the Red Moon, which was 1908, there was not a love scene between African American people on stage until Shuffle Along, which is 1921. So it started the conversation, and it allowed for that transition to happen, and really for minstrelsy to no longer be accepted by the Black performers themselves, so that it could be put aside and moved on from. So I do have a recording of a song from the Red Moon. This was originally sung by Abby Mitchell, who was an opera singer and classical singer. She was the original Clara in the Gershwin's Porgy and Bess. But this show, which is much earlier than that, she played the lead love interest. So this is called The Pathways of Love, from the Red Moon.